This meeting will be broadcast live via the County Council's website and will also be available for viewing after the meeting. Can I please ask everyone to switch their microphones on when speaking and turn it off when finished speaking? I have received apologies from Mr. Gillard, and Mrs. Fryer, Councillor Fryer, is in attendance as his substitute. Are there any other apologies? Item 1. Minutes of the meeting held on 9th November 2023. I propose that the minutes of the meeting held on 9th of November 2023 are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Are we all in agreement? Agreed? Anybody disagree? Okay, thank you. Item 2, question time. I have not received any questions from the public. Item 3, questions asked by members under Standing Order 7. I have not received any questions from members. Item 4, there are no urgent items. Item 5, declaration of interests in respect of items on the agenda. Do members have any declarations you wish to make? Thank you. Item 7, no petitions have been received. Item 8, our first substantive item is the MTFS for 2024-25 to 2027-28, which is on pages 11 to 30 of the agenda. Can I welcome to the meeting the Cabinet Lead Member, Mr. O'Shea, the Director, Anne Carruthers, the Assistant Directors, Jana Walker and Pat Clark and Susan Baum. The structure for considering the report is set out on the separate sheet which has been circulated to all members. I will first invite the Director and Lead Member to introduce the report. Over to you, Anne.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good afternoon, committee. As you'll see on the EU papers, we're proposing to take you through the revenue element of the H&T, the Highways and Transport budget situation, and then pause for any questions and discussion, and then the capital. There's quite a lot in the revenue, so if you just bear with me, I want to kind of take you, through some of the detail of that. As you'll see in paragraph 5, the revenue budget for the Highways and Transport element of the department comes in at just under 68 million for the coming financial year 24-25 and rises to 71 million by the end of the MTFS period. This is a net position. The gross expenditure is 118 million for those services, but that's offset, as you see, by 50 million in income, grants and recharges there to give us that net position. The breakdown of spend across the two branches within the H&T services is shown at paragraph 7 of your report, and there's further details of that if you are interested in Appendix A. There are some budget adjustments that go on, and this is where my financial colleagues are here to assist if you want to go into any of the detail on that contribute to these figures, such as the increase to employers' contributions to the pension scheme, how we reflect inflation on contracts, etc. Details of those are in paragraph 8. If I move on then to the growth section, these are the main areas of service where we're seeing increasing growth pressures. So, this time next year, it's going to cost us more to deliver those services. Paragraph 14 sets out what we think the growth will be needed across our services for the MTFS period. And as you can see, it rises from 4.5 million to 9.5 at the end of the MTFS. So fairly substantial when you look at our net budget, our net spend for the year. SEN transport and social care transport, the first two lines you'll see are the biggest elements of that, and the committee will be very familiar with this. It's no change from previous years. It's an area of increasing demand and increasing cost there. As you probably are aware from various other discussions we've had, we're continuing to see growth in numbers. We're continuing to see increasing complexity of cases. Therefore, the transport we have to provide, and all that drives up cost. We have difficulties with the market and recruitment, as well as inflation on contracts, which at times ends up with significant contract handbacks. And obviously when we retender, we're paying more, etc. So that one's a challenging situation. We do have a savings and efficiency project in place to look at that and help us manage down that increase in cost and that growth and deliver some savings, and we'll come on to that later on. For the social care transport, while we're seeing the numbers remain steady, what we are seeing is the pattern is increasing use and demand from those users. So it's kind of a different trend and pattern than we're seeing in the SEN transport area there. Work has been undertaken to look at that and again how we can manage down some of that growth. In terms of highway maintenance, you can see we've got just over $500,000 in growth. This work's considered essential for delivering safety out there on the network, and it includes more for things like safety inspections and more around some of our environmental maintenance work and asset cleaning as well. Short-term growth item, because we're expecting, and I'll come on to it later as well, some additional funding through Network North funding, if that is confirmed in the longer term. There's still a question mark over that, however, but that might help alleviate some of the growth pressures across highway maintenance if it does come to fruition. We've got 200,000 on demand management. This is a target we've been set by the corporate centre, and it's about reducing down the level of growth we've seen year on year across SEN and social care transport. So it's the difference between our previous MTFS position and the increased growth we're seeing in this proposed MTF position. We've been given a target of taking that down by 10%, which is what the 200k is. So that's in addition to the savings we're trying to deliver out across those service areas. The last growth item for highways and transport is the market premium we have for our HGV drivers. Again, you'll be aware that for a couple of years now, probably it is, we've really been struggling to recruit in that area. For certain areas of our operation, it's absolutely essential we have HGV drivers, such as our winter gritters. They're out last night, they're out tonight. We know how essential that service is for the safety of our network. This market premium is required there to help with the retention and recruitment to that area. And that explains that growth item. I'll move on to the savings then. And this is the savings we are, as a department, seeking to deliver over the MTFS period. The paragraph under paragraph 16, the table under paragraph 16 summarises those savings we're looking at. And that starts at just under 900,000 next financial year, rising to 2.9. I mean, there's just a couple of observations, and I'm sure you won't have missed it. Quite small figures when you look and compare it to the level of growth we're experiencing. So there's a challenge. But the other thing I would say is, by no means is it easy to deliver on those savings. And again, I'm sure you'll appreciate that. And that reflects, I think, the fact that we've been at this for over a decade, haven't we? Delivering savings, as an authority, as all local authorities up and down the country having to have done. But we've done all the easy hits, so it's harder and harder to find that money out of our services. When in many areas we've got increasing demand, doesn't matter whether it's in the SEN transport or highway maintenance, etc. So those two things aren't easy bedfellows. The other thing I would say about that is the resourcing issues. We are challenged with delivering business as usual and delivering savings and coming up with more savings. So it's just another element in the complexity in delivering on some of these. However, if I go on to look at some of the savings, the first one, we call it ATP, that's our assisted transport programme. So that basically is looking at our SEN transport, our social care transport, etc. So we've got a whole programme of work going on there, including things like looking at new IT systems, route optimisation, reviewing all our solo contracts, looking at how we contract with the market, helping the market expand so there's more competition is the word I'm looking for, a whole number of initiatives there. What I would say on that is it is a programme over a number of years. There is a kind of limited window we have every year before we get into the depths and the peak of service delivery. So we have a programme over a number of years to deliver on those savings there. We have 400,000 saving on subsidised buses. That has been been delayed because we've had the BSIP, Bus Service Improvement Plan funding from government, which has been added to by the Network North funding. And the caveats of that additional funding from government is you can't reduce your base budgets. So the saving that had been allocated to that area has been deferred. At the moment, we've got 2 years confirmed funding for buses and the promise of more beyond that, but we'll need to wait and see if that comes to fruition. Similarly with Park and Ride, the saving there has been deferred because the additional funding there will go to that subsidy, the contribution we have to make alongside Leicester City to support the operation of that service. The committee's familiar with our street lighting saving. We've got 280,000 coming this financial year, or sorry, not this financial year, but in total is coming from that, and that's gone from the pilot that Cabinet has just agreed to implement to reduce street lighting intensity to 30% from 8 p.m. at night. There is a number of exceptions to that, different types of location, but that's where that savings coming from. So obviously we will be looking carefully at that pilot at the end of the period to see if that continues or not. It's running for an 18-month period. And the last saving relates to the cancellation of HS2. As you know, it's no longer going north of Birmingham, so it isn't coming to East Midlands Parkway. And that was work there that was looking at how we optimise that and minimise the implications for Leicestershire, but now it's no longer coming through the county. We no longer need that, so that's where that saving arises from. I'll move on to the section on SUDS now. SUDS, savings under development. This is our next generation savings, the pipeline that will come in 1, 2, 3, 4 years, because we've still got funding gaps, budget gaps, so we need to come up with more. So these are the things we're looking at there, and as you can see, we've got quite a range of different activities there. Things like reviewing our fees and charges, lane rental, that's there. That would be potentially income generation as well as the ability to invest more in our highways and transport services. It is a scheme about basically charging for your more higher category roads, your A-class roads, when utilities workers, developers, ourselves as the Highway Authority are on those areas of the network carrying out roadworks. However, before we can look at that, we need to review our ongoing existing network management function, and that's what we will be doing with first. That needs to be fairly robust and as efficient as possible before we can look at lane rental. But there is a pipeline of things we are looking at there. We've got a number of smaller scale things like digitisation, automation, as well as looking at commercial opportunities, further commercial opportunities within our highways operation. Things like maxing income from our sign shop. We manufacture signs, there's an opportunity there, and various other commercial things, sponsorship, etc. It's trying to max out some of these initiatives. We do also mention driven inspections on that list. I just put a caveat on that. We have been testing that. That is about automation. So you drive the network and it picks up your defects. What we're finding so far is the system isn't quite robust enough to rely on that as our full inspections programme. So it's something we'll maybe look to revisit in a few years' time as technology advances. But in the moment, we're not confident there's any particular savings in that one. The only other thing I would add to that, we are now going to, given the financial position overall of the council and the increasing budget gaps we've got, is undertake a round of efficiencies, service efficiency reviews. So there will be more work probably added to this. It is live, and we will add to it as we undertake that work. So the list you see before you is not exhaustive. Last section before I stop, and I'm sure I'll get a few questions. Other factors influencing our delivery there. I would re-emphasise that point. It doesn't get any easier. It gets harder. And actually, where we're getting more and more to for the likes of the Highways and Transport Service is service reductions. We've been driving efficiencies for a decade now, it's hard to make any real kind of financial savings in that route. Therefore, we are looking more and more at service reductions. The Network North money I mentioned before, that comes across for our highway maintenance and bus support, and it's been confirmed for this financial year and next financial year. Beyond that, there is indications of potentially substantial additional money, but none of that is confirmed yet, so we need to wait and see if that happens. As I mentioned earlier, there's a caveat to that. We can't reduce base budgets in those areas. So in effect, in terms of finding savings across highways and transport, it's reducing our options, because in many of those areas, in terms of bus support, in terms of highway maintenance, are discretionary. However, to get the Network North funding, we are limited in what we can do there in terms of reducing current budget spend on it. I've talked about SEN transport and that being a biggest driver for growth in the department for a number of years, and that's unlikely to change because we aren't seeing a change in trend in the increasing numbers of EHCPs that are coming through the system. So, that's quite difficult for us then to make a real impact in managing down that growth. What we need to do is make sure we're delivering the service as efficiently, cost efficiently as possible, given the numbers are increasing. Climate change, just to give you a bit of variety here, that's another one that's causing us a few wee challenges. And, we're straight off the back of Storm Henk. Now, that hasn't gone away for us. Yes, there's a clear up. Yes, it was devastating. And, well, I'm not going to steal Pat's thunder because we're going to come on to that in the agenda. There is a clear up in the immediate works and the immediate cost for the authority as the Highway Authority and as part of the wider resilience response to that. But as the lead local flood authority for the county or for Leicestershire, we have got the ongoing challenge of carrying out the investigations into those flooding. We're still collating all the information. It's still changing day by day, but fundamentally, we're in a position that we've seen unprecedented scale of work that we are going to have to do. We've never seen anything like this in Leicestershire, which has been a fortunate thing, but we are here now. That work will go on over a number of years, and our ability to resource that is something we're looking at really closely, but it's going to be, a challenging one. And that's something we're going to see more and more of. So I think, I have to highlight here, it's going to be a challenge for us in terms of how we fund that and how we resource that. And I think the only other thing I'd mention is we're still getting lots of ad hoc funding streams where we have to react quite quickly. There is lots of resource going into competitive bidding, and if you're unsuccessful, that's wasted resource in effect. And also things like, the BSIP money last year was a prime example. We had 3 different funding announcements on that one funding stream within something like a 4-month period. Each time we got it, we had to jump and review what we were doing, and we had to revise future plans. That is very, very difficult and resource intensive. And, we have to react to government, but it's not a lot we can do about it. We're not saying no to money, but actually it makes it a very challenging environment. And when we are stretched for resource, it just adds to the difficulty of it. And on that positive note, I will pause there, Chair.
Thank you, Anne, for a very comprehensive and interesting report. Before I open it to members for questions, may I remind members that the questions you ask now are only for the part of the report up to but not including paragraph 33. Councillor Fillmore.
Thank you, Chair. I apologise, my hand was late going up on declarations of interest, so for the record, and Joanne's quite used to recording this one. My wife is employed directly in SEND by this authority in a specialist unit, so just for the record, but it's non-pecuniary as far as this is concerned. My query, I think, Anne, is, we're all very, very aware of the increase in children's SEND, but of course children become adults, and there will be a flow through and a follow through. So I'm just curious, so we have substantial transport growth for children's SEND. The same level of growth is not reflected in the adult side of the world. So I'm just curious, what does that horizon actually look like? Because we know there's more children being identified. We know there's more children being allocated EHCPs. Now, I've got a wife who lives in a complex world, and a lot of those children will become need to be supported by us in the adult social side. So, when are we likely, if there is a sort of the crystal ball, likely to see the children SEND flow through to the adult side? And there's going to have to be, I assume, quite a significant impact on the adult social transport element. So, thank you, Chair.
I'll give you a partial answer because I don't think I could possibly answer that in any detail. And I don't know if Pat's got any other thoughts either. I haven't quite got a crystal ball. I mean, at the moment, I think we're quite fortunate that it isn't being seen, that trend of we're seeing in children's with increasing EHCPs and the requirements there isn't directly translating into adults. We are seeing, as you've seen here, increasing growth in the adult social care, but it's in a whole different way. It's not increasing numbers coming into the system. It's about that frequency of use. Now, we do cater under the SEN up to 25 because that's where, so we're doing that now. Whether, I don't know, there's different provisions when you get post that into the adults or people just drop off because they can't access the same type of provision. I'm not sure if that's the case. If your whole eligibility and the requirement that then triggers transport is significantly different, that doesn't see that flow through, or whether it's just a lag and we haven't got it yet. I hope not, because that just does not bode well, if it does translate directly through. I'm not up enough, sorry, on the eligibility and requirements in things that when you get into the adult social care arena that triggers the requirement for transport. Pat, do you have anything further you would add on that?
Thanks, Anne. Just picking up on the question, I think, Anne, it's very, very difficult. There is no crystal ball there. We are working with the teams in adults as well to try and get a greater understanding for the adult social care arena. You will have a knock-on effect, but I do think that we've seen the growth in SEN year on year now, and interestingly, we haven't seen that growth tipping into the adults in the way that they require transport. Now, there is other means for them to move around, different ways of getting around, and what you might find is that they are avoiding the need for the transport that's provided by us as much.
I'll just let Anne come back first, please.
Just another thought. There's entirely different eligibility criteria. Obviously, young people, SEN, they have to be statutorily, they have to be in a setting, a school setting, support setting. Adults is a completely different ballgame. So I imagine the main difference in the driver is entirely different eligibility criteria.
That's almost exactly the question or the point I was going to pick up on. Is it this natural difference between our statutory responsibility for education versus a slightly different support mechanism for adults? And I can't help thinking that by default there's an element of the adults being more static, as in they tend not to move around quite anywhere near as often, or they may be in a specialist support environment, and therefore the transport need is only from there to a hospital or back again. So I was just curious because one is incredibly scary growth, and the other one's, I wouldn't say it's static, but it's nowhere near reflecting that scale. So I was just curious. It's just a particular area of interest. So thank you, Jeff. Thanks, Anne.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Hack, I think, next.
Oh God, I've forgotten all about that. It's like you're going back into new year and new things. Sorry about that. Very similar train of thought in terms of the pressure on SEN. I suppose the trick really is to understand where the demand's coming from and where that demand is going to, because it's you're doing the bit from A to B, aren't you? And I still don't feel as if, because the EHCP process is difficult, delayed, we're not doing it quickly enough, we're going to tribunal too regularly, that actually the most suitable SEN place, which might be the closest to home, quite often the place has disappeared by the time the approval's been made. And I've got examples in my own patch where they drive past the secondary specialist school that it would have been completely fine for that child, but there was no places available, so they go further away, which now needs that child needs transporting. They wouldn't have done had the EHCP process been efficient and gone quickly enough. So my sense is, at what point do we expect EHCP to recover in terms of doing that process quick enough so those children can go to the closest SEN place, and therefore transport by its very nature should start to reduce. The second point is, what's the tipping point to come in-house? Because part of the difficulty we have is taxi companies by their very nature have a choice whether to do this or not, and at the point they go, I can't bother anymore, they hand back that journey. What point does it become economically viable for us to start delivering some of this in-house? And how do those, particularly specialist vehicles, go from a peak pre-9 o'clock arrangement to actually looking at the day services that start that little bit later, so that same vehicle can be used? And how are we doing that? I suppose the last thing is technology. What are we doing in terms of scheduling technology that is helping us to plan those journeys more efficiently? Are we comfortable they're as efficient as they possibly can be? Very small point on the HS2. Obviously, HS2 cancellation means we've saved a bit of money, but what has that cost us? Just morbid curiosity, really. How much has that HS2 infrastructure as an authority cost our authority, as opposed to the national authority? Is that finance the same? Because when we look at the redundant cost, it's not just on HS2 itself, it's on all the local authorities' contributions in the main. It'd be interesting to understand just how much does it cost us. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Hopefully we'll cover all your points between us. I'll start, I think, and then maybe Pat can have a bit more detail on some of the SEN questions. In terms of EHCPs, you're absolutely right in terms, the later it is, the harder it is to plan effectively. And as you say, a child may not get the nearest school setting that was suitable for them. But the other challenge that gives us as well, we might have arranged transport for 3 or 4 children in that area going to, and then we get late on and we have to have separate transport. So again, it's less effective and efficient planning of transport, so it's a kind of double whammy. The child's going further, we're paying more, etc., because we can't plan. The actual, and I'll leave it to Pat in case he knows any more. I know colleagues in children's, because obviously it's children's that allocate the EHCPs. They have been working really hard on this, and I know they have brought down the timelines and the backlogs. When we get to the ideal scenario, I'm not quite sure on. I don't know if Pat's got any more information, but I know they are working on it hard. Your question about when is the point do we bring it in-house? Well, we actually do have our own in-house fleet, so we do provide. Now, our challenge there is to make the best use of that in-house fleet. They do tend to be the kind of minibus type vehicles, so they can, for multiple occupancy, rather than specialist vehicles, etc. So it's about using, your resources to the best way. And one thing we are looking at, we are this year carrying out a review of all our solo operations to see if we can get them on multiple. But those solo operations tend to be obviously the most expensive. Therefore, is it better to bring those ones in-house rather than maybe some of the others? So we're looking at the balance. Now, you might say, actually, bring loads of it in and have lots of control. The issues with things like driver recruitment, and even we've gone through a period, I think it's easing up now, but we have gone through a period in the last couple of years whereby if we have, because we're challenged in drivers and escorts for self-employing those, we've had so many vacancies that the minute even somebody's off sick and we've got agencies, we then ring up, because, it's not a thing we can let lie, because if I don't have a driver tomorrow morning, somebody's child isn't getting taken to their school. We got to the point of first agency, second agency, third agency could not we were literally phoning people and saying, unfortunately, we can't take your child today. Now, the element of risk for the local authority, if we take that whole operation in-house, as well as the capital cost for the vehicles, the maintenance, etc., is quite significant. So for me, there will always be a balance between what's the size of the in-house fleet and what's the size of, you want to put it out to the market. And I think that's something we have to keep under review. But I think with what we have got, our real challenge is to make sure we're absolutely using our own in-house fleet in the best way to manage down those really significant costs. And it's something we keep under review, because obviously it changes as the market conditions change as well. Technology, we're always trying to advance on that. We've got, it probably won't be of interest to you, but it's a massive stepping stone to us controlling some of the costs in this area. Is we're replacing an in-house IT system to allow the planning, the contracts, the management of all this year. That will make a big difference. And also we've got route optimization software to help us with that planning, etc. Tech keeps moving though, and that is a challenge to keep up with it, and to, because it's a cost in itself, etc. When do you jump and invest in the next thing? But yes, we're very aware of, some things you cannot do without in this day and age. Route optimization is one of them. I think that's all I'll say in SA, and I'll let Pat come in more detail if he wants to. HS2 cost, we had a base cost for a team who, it was officer resource who were doing the liaison with the affected communities, doing the liaison between HS2 Limited, Network Rail, DFT, and the communities as well, that kind of thing. That was a direct cost we have, and that's a saving that you have seen is being offered up there. There hasn't been any other cost that this authority has put into HS2 in any way. It's been that resource to, do that kind of liaison, make sure that, any impacts were potentially mitigated by lobbying with HS2 as well, responding to all the parliamentary stuff. That's what's gone, and that was the cost investment we had in HS2. Okay.
Just picking up on a couple of quick little pieces there, and so in children's services at the moment, they're going through a TCEL project, which is a business improvement project. And as Anne has quite rightfully said, we have seen an increase in the speed of getting the EHCPs. It's not where it needs to be, but it has improved on previous years. Most important point for us in transport, and this is a very transport view, it's so important we get the information as soon as we possibly can, so we can do that route optimization, that real planning of that child's needs to get them to the school, and we can go out to market and get the best route. And mentioned the model that we've got. We are really fortunate to have an in-house provision still. A lot of authorities no longer have that in-house provision, and I'm sure some of them are wishing they did have it. It helps us manage the costs. It helps us keep the market interested in what we're doing and make sure that the market, the rate that we're paying in the marketplace is a more realistic rate. But it is difficult. Recruitment is very, very difficult in that area. People have found, certainly since COVID, some people haven't come back in to the marketplace, and others have just got alternative employment in other places. The model that we do operate to is some of our escorts and drivers are employed right the way through the day. Others will do it on a part-time basis, and the ones that are employed right the way through the day will offer provisions to other places and also meals and bits and pieces like that. So they are utilised throughout the day. We have this year put in we have got an order in at the moment for some new fleet that's coming into us, should be in by the summer term, and the first tranche of that should be in by the summer term, and that's just to replace the ones that we've currently got that are probably close to their end of their life. They are beginning to show significant signs of stress and also unreliable. And mention the IT system. Quite rightfully, we've got a significant piece of work going on at the moment with regard to a new IT system. We've had an old one that was an in-house one that was probably way out of date, or it wasn't probably, it was way out of date. We are now bringing in a new system that is nationally supported. That has also got route optimization and scheduling inbuilt in the system. In the past, we've had to take it out of one system and then put it into another system, and it was a bit clunky. That's all now joined up, so I'm hoping that we'll see a big impact this year on that and make life a little bit easier, both for the teams that's trying to arrange the transport and the transport users themselves, because that's the important part in all of this. I think I've picked up most of your points that you've raised, but if there is any others, happy to pick them up. Okay, thank you.
Are you happy, Councillor? Have you had your questions answered? Thank you. Before I go to Councillor Fryer, could I just ask very quickly, this new super duper IT system you're getting in, it's not Fujitsu, is it?
Super duper IT system, an interesting one, and no, it's not Fujitsu.
Councillor Fryer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much to the officers. I think a lot of my points and questions have been answered, but just to reiterate, I think I should, of course, announce that I am chair of the Children and Families Scrutiny Committee, which is always looking at the amount of SEND transport that's needed. And our meeting next week, no doubt, will be raised again. I think what has been explained, we have to look after our children now to 25, and then they become adults. But I don't think, from experience and seeing what's happening, that the people who are under 25 requiring SEND transport for education, etc., and it's mainly, I presume, education and medical reasons, health reasons, that will probably alter once they get over 25, because whereas under 25, and particularly when they're even younger, they need more one-to-one accompaniment. Once people are older, there are so many now extra technical facilities, from cars and transport and everything now, that they can access. So the requirement for our transport can naturally reduce. They often live in more communities, so therefore there are facilities, rather than with children and young people, they can be scattered over a whole massive area, and you're just one here and one there and one there. So I can see that it's difficult to compare. But yes, we do look at it all the time. And as you mentioned, the TISL programme, everybody's working very hard on that. So on that side, but I do thank you very much.
Councillor Bill.
Having heard from Hilary there, I'm not so sure whether my contributions are going to be helpful or not. Probably not. But this is so complex and sensitive. It's difficult to know how to make a contribution that is helpful. But paragraph 14 is frightening, isn't it? Because highway maintenance, for example, we're not going to be spending too much more at all for the next 2 years, and then we don't spend anything further, despite presumably the deterioration of the network. And yet on the two areas that are causing us concern here, we're spending £4 million on 4 million additional pounds on special educational needs and social care transport, and that's going to go up to 9,000. It seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that, and I've got no criticism of anybody here in County Hall at all, because I think the County Council has been left with the most difficult situation of all, where schools have actually largely gone off to be academies and are competitive, and the county council has been left with this area of activity. Am I wrong so far?
Just a couple of clarifications about me, Mr. Bill. The figures you see there, for instance, highway maintenance, 555, that's 100,000. That's additional growth. So that's over our base budget. So we will have, so for next year, for instance, where it says 555 for highway maintenance, we have got our base budget spend and an additional 500,000, just over 500,000. So these figures are in millions there. So we've got our additional budget, we've got our existing budget, and then that's growth. So for the special education needs, where it goes up to 6 million growth over the MTFS, we have got our base spend there, and across SEN, social care, school transport, we spend in excess of 20 million in our base budget. So this is additional to that.
Yes, so that's £9 million on top of the £20 million.
9 million on top of the whole highways and transport revenue budget, which is just under 70 million growth.
Yes. I still think that the county council has been left with this most difficult area, which the county council itself has decided that the transport side of it has to be paid for by highways and transportation. It totally dominates. Totally dominates our activity. I know there's been real attempts to try to reduce it and to manage it, which makes me wonder just how much it would have gone up to if we hadn't made those efforts. But I'm concerned that education seems to have gone off into academies, and what is basically possibly a health matter, instead of being met by the NHS, has been left to county councils, and the county councils have decided, our county council, for example, I suppose all county councils have decided that the transport side has to be met out of this budget. Am I right so far in my analysis?
It's not the county council deciding that the provision of transport is left to us. It's national legislation. It's a statutory duty that comes to the upper tier local authority, to the Transport Authority, which is us. The fact that it sits in the highways and transport budget and not children's, for instance, yes, that is a decision of LCC, Leicestershire County Council. However, regardless of whether it sits in my department or in children's and families department, the growth pressures would be the same, and we'd have the same challenges. So it's a statutory duty we as the county council have to do. How we manage it within the county council is entirely down to Leicestershire County Council. And however, we would be still experiencing the same growth issues and the same challenges of managing it. The only other thing I would say, and I think I have probably said to this committee before, is this problem isn't unique to us as Leicestershire. This is a national problem. I chaired a board for ADEPT, the Association of Directors of Environment, Economy, Planning and Transport, and the Association of Directors of Children's Services. It was a joint piece of work looking specifically at this issue, the rising demand and rising cost of SEND transport. And we've come out as a group with recommendations to government as to what needs to change in terms of legislation. And one of them was that thing you mentioned about health. There are some element, a minority, but very costly element of transport whereby the needs are so complex that actually you could argue that should come under the NHS, the health sector. And that was one of the recommendations that national group has made to government. Whether any of that gets any traction is another thing. But just to reassure, it's not a Leicestershire only problem.
No, well, I assume that to be the case. So it might be useful, Chairman, if we could actually see these recommendations and pass them on and endorse them, because this demand on our budget here is really sort of overwhelming all the other work that we would very much like to see, and which I think people out there would like us to see doing. So it might be very useful if we could see Anne's recommendations and hopefully give it some backing.
Your point is taken, Councillor Bill, and I'm sure I'll speak to Anne afterwards. I'll send an email, and if you could either say yes or no to
happy to share. They are the recommendations of those two professional bodies, but happy to share.
Thank you. So with no other, Councillor Fillmore.
Can we move on to flooding?
No.
If there's no other questions on this part of the up to and including paragraph, not including paragraph 33, I'll now hand over to Anne to talk about the capital programme. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and I promise I will be far more brief on this section, okay? So this is the capital spend element of the Highways and Transport budget for the next 4 years. Paragraph 33 gives you a summary. You'll see that we've got 80 million for next financial year and 207 million overall capital programme over the 4-year MTFS period. The spend on major and minor schemes will vary year on year, depending on where it's at. If it's major build element, or if just completing, etc., or early stages. So that explains some of the changes, because it does vary quite a lot over each year, as you'll see from that table there. Bit more detail for you in Appendix C. The table under paragraph 34 shows you the source of our funding, where we get all that capital from. So you'll see there's a lot of money that comes in from the DFT. In terms of the LTP grant funding, there's a few of those, the pothole funding, and also the Network North money there that we've had confirmed. As I say, there's further money promised after that, but that's just indicative. So this shows where, for those, I should point out, for those, the LTP grant funding and the pothole funding, the first year is usually, the way it works is that we get that confirmed from DFT, and the following 3 years are indicative. But, historically, they have been round about those levels. So, fairly usual that they get confirmed at that. What else will I point out for you? The only other point I think I would make is the last row of corporate funding. So the bottom row, in that you will see it significantly decreases over time. Again, this is reflecting, the council's wider financial position and decisions made, and it's been to cabinet, as you know, again, about the council's willingness or ability, the word should be ability, to gap fund any of our major schemes or forward fund unless there's a guarantee that there will be a repayment on that. So, just probably worth pointing that out. A few years ago, that wouldn't have been the case. However, our current financial circumstances mean the council is no longer able to make up funding gaps in major schemes. Challenges there is for a capital programme: inflation, meaning we deliver less for the money we have. So even with our highway maintenance, our budgets are relatively static. It means we actually get less done out there in the ground. Or we have big funding gaps in some of our big major projects, which causes us, significant challenges. Staffing resource is an issue for us, and particularly where we have to react to ad hoc competitive funding streams, and potentially then wasted resource if we're unsuccessful in those. I don't think there's anything else particularly I would highlight. Happy to obviously answer questions, Chair.
Thank you, Anne. Councillor Hack.
Thank you, Chair. Just one diddly bit. I'm assuming that corporate funding is partly paid for by the borrowings that we've agreed under the Melton Distributor Road. That's paid for by loan.
Yes, our capital funding is. Yeah. There will be an element of that is borrowing, yes, so that will have a revenue cost to repay that as well.
Okay, the second question is we've obviously changed the strategy in terms of front fund, gap fund, or taking it at risk, just think, in terms of development. Is that is that going to change the way in which we go for bidding? Have we made strategic decisions around actually we're going to stop bidding in this area, we're not going to do those things anymore, on top of that strategic change in terms of the gap funding? The one obviously I'm really thinking about is the long-term desire to improve the amount of active travel network that we've got. What will be the strategy if we're concerned about the gap funding risk?
I mean, the principle is any bidding, we need to have our costs covered. So either we've got a route and we know, for instance, developer funding is going to, I mean, often the issue with some of the, most of government's competitive funding streams is you don't get 100%. So you have to show match funding from somewhere. Gone are the days that we as the county council can then say we'll match fund 50%, 20%, whatever it happens to be the requirement for that particular funding thing. So we'll have to have a plan for where we're getting that match funding from, be that developer contributions or somewhere else. If we cannot make that work, we have to seriously think, and the chances are the answer would be no, we're not bidding for it.
In terms of developer contributions, have we changed our modelling in terms of what we're going to need in terms of developer contributions, recognising inflationary pressure, and would be looking at a more strategic way of building in inflation? Because obviously the big kicker in terms of the Melton distributor had been inflation, and clearly the DFT bid was done 5 years ago. At what point will we see this kind of, we know these things take 5 years. What will we be doing in terms of adjusting our long-term calculations on huge investment projects to recognise there is this element of inflation, and how do we do that so we don't get caught out again?
If I start, and then if I can hand over to Janet, I mean, it comes back to the local plan process, because at the end of the day, to get a local plan through and be found sound, it has to be viable. So you've got your viability assessment. So the overall, in a nutshell, theory is we look at, in terms of the amount of growth, where it is, what is the infrastructure that's needed. Obviously, we're focusing on the highway infrastructure, but there's also schools infrastructure, there's energy infrastructure, there's all that kind of stuff. But, you know, we're focusing on the highways one for the, you know, our area of interest in that. That has to then add up, you know, the cost of all that infrastructure needs to add up in terms of the amount of development coming forward. And there has to be that calculation and tested through a viability assessment with the local plan to show that it's affordable through the development sector as well. That then trickles down over time when you're getting to individual developments, how much you're requiring. That's set in, you know, we need to think about inflation in that. That's set at that time. It is a very challenging model. In personal view, I think there is a feeling in that to now expect, with the cost of some of the infrastructure that is required, that the development sector can fully cover all that. However, it's the fundamental premise of our existing planning system. I'm going to hand to Jana if I can, because she's a bit more closer to some of that detail.
Yeah, just picking up on Anne's point from there, really, your example's really pertinent to some of the schemes we've seen and some of the local plan work where we're trying to head that off now. So, for example, we're working with Charnwood at the moment. One of the things we did early on, and we've done with Melton as well, is what used to happen was inflation did apply, but it applied from when the developers signed the 106 agreement onwards. Now, as you've said, we may have designed that scheme and priced it 5 years prior to that. So we're writing strategies with a specific to address the number of challenges in infrastructure delivery, and inflation being a specific one. So now we will apply an inflation calculation from the date that the scheme was agreed, and we will review those. As Anne said, that is causing, I think, some concern in the planning arena around viability. My personal view, and I think, you know, we're trying to find a way through it, is that the only compromise to that is to have a strategy for everything you want to do in an area. Recognise that developer funding will only ever, at the moment anyway, be a part of that, but you have to maximise that element of it in order to support these sort of external funding. And I think, as Anne said, what we'll see is that the match funding will only come in over a period of time. So when we bid for and deliver schemes, it would be later, whereas in the past we've done some right up front before some houses are built, before that impact is there, to try and mitigate it. We'll be doing it at the later end of that. But in terms of the inflation question specifically, we have switched that from when the agreement is signed, which can be a number of years later, to measuring that from when we costed up the scheme. And what we'll be doing is working with finance colleagues as well to make sure that the inflation is reflective of construction inflation, that we're using the right indices to do that, and that the evidence for that is reviewed more often. I think, you know, an average across the construction industry was 18%. That was higher than some other industries. So using the consumer price index, for instance, isn't necessarily appropriate for those. So we are learning those lessons and implementing them. I think, as Anne said, though, the challenge for that is then the reality of the cost of infrastructure is a real challenge for strategic planning.
Councillor Bill.
Yeah, I mean, we've skipped over savings. Can I just say on the savings list here somewhere, buses, when the government actually gave local government this extra money for bus services, I think they expected to see bus services retained and improved. I'm not so sure that the current policy that we're pursuing will enable it to happen, but that's just a comment. I hope we can actually retain our existing bus services and improve them where we can. The savings under development, obviously, that they will all help if they can be brought forward. So anything that can be done to bring in more income is to be welcomed. I think we'd all want to see these improvements brought in as soon as these additional measures brought in as soon as possible. Thank you, Chairman.
Any Councillor Fillmore?
Thank you, Chair. So I think just picking up on particularly Jana's comments. In another place, we have New Lowestoft as the planning authority. And from the principle from the outset was infrastructure led. So the pinch point funding came in, the motorway bridge went in, the main road went in, and. But counter, or the opposite side of that coin of getting that bit really, really well right, was that Section 106 agreements are probably 10 plus years old. And of course, the world's changed in 10 plus years. So I think there's a really, really, really important point that Jana and her team are looking at as to what does that 106 agreement look like? When is it delivered? And what is factored in for it over its time of delivery? And I think that's the big one. What is that? So, you know, go for it. It absolutely has to be addressed. But there is a bit of a model with New Lowestoft of getting all the main road infrastructure in before the first brick for the house went in, as far as I can remember. So, anyway, just an observation, Chair, just from another place where I live. So, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fryer.
I don't very often sit on this committee, but I do enjoy sitting on it when I'm allowed to have. So, there's one I seem to remember discussing some years ago was Zosh Bridge. Now, a few years ago, I was on this committee again, and I think then we were looking at costs, and there was a bit of intake of breath of 9 million, and hopefully finished in a shortish time. I now see that I'm looking at page 29. Is that it's anticipated it will finish in March 26, and the total cost will be 16,530,000, so nearly double what we talked about before. And this year it's one figure, next year it's a lower figure, and it gets lower. Are we now more optimistic that we've got a more practical, and it is sort of, yes, it will be done in March 26, and in the 27-28 budget we won't be spending anything, and in the 26-27 budget it's less, tiny amount, or would I be, if I'm still here, in 3 years' time be sitting on this committee and see Zosh Bridge.
I'm going to say I'm really pleased to hear you enjoy sitting on the committee. But I'm going to look at Pat for a bit more detailed information here. But I think the answer is we're going to be quite positive on this one. Hopefully, Pat.
Thanks, Anne. No pressure then. Zoch Bridge, really interesting. The tender actually closed today, so the tender is all now with Leicestershire County Council, and we'll begin evaluation. I'd love to, that crystal ball, I need it. I'd love to be able to sit here and say we won't be talking about it in 3 years' time. And everything going well, that shouldn't be the case. But until we do the next evaluation, until this tender evaluation gets done, I can't promise that. If the tender evaluation comes in to budget and where we expect it to be, it will be a case of, right, let's get on with what we need to do. But if we can't afford it, we will then have to relook at the situation again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you.
I think when it's opened, I think we need a bottle of champagne and a cutting ribbon.
I would just like to say, Councillor Fry, if you keep saying you enjoy it too much, you'll end up on this committee full time. So when I joined the army, my father only told me one thing: never volunteer for anything. And if the tenders do get, if we get any progress on it, if you could possibly email Councillor Fry and just let her know that we're going to go ahead with it, give us something to look forward to. Thank you. No more questions on this part. Thank you for a very interesting second part to the report. And we just need to, we're asked to note the report, and the comments made by members today will be presented to the Scrutiny Commission on the 29th of January and the Cabinet in February. Is everybody happy with that? Thank you. We'll now move on to item number 9, the report on third-party funded schemes in the public highway. And this is on pages 31 to 40. Jana Walker, Assistant Director, is presenting the report, and I would just like to remind members, following on from this morning's chair meeting at 11, I have asked Jana to come back to this meeting with some more information on how this process works, the third-party funded schemes, to give us an idea as councillors, and not to go into too much detail on what hasn't been done in the past, but more importantly, how it's working now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of the report that you've got in front of you today is to explain the process for approval of third-party funded schemes within the highway. And I think it follows a request that the Scrutiny Commission made at its meeting in June 2023. And I can see, the request, I think, really emerges out of some really understandable confusion as to why we as a highway authority might turn down effectively offers of money and investment from third parties, like developers. When we say third parties, we mean anybody but ourselves as the highway authority, or parish councils for facilities in the highway. So as we take you through the report, we set out some of those reasons that we might do that, but also some of the circumstances in which we might also welcome that investment. So we've used examples in the report, and I think it's a useful opportunity for us to explain why at a time when we've just had a report that really is constantly referring to our difficult financial situation, we might appear to be turning down money. So just for background, as a highway authority, there are numerous ways in which we interact with third parties, but in particular in this report, the types of third party schemes that we're talking about in the highway tend to fall under the category set out in paragraph 11 of the report. And to summarise, they are where we have mitigation agreed under the planning process, and this is usually funded by the developer for the purpose of mitigating the impact of their development on the highway network. Small improvement schemes that could be funded by a parish council or perhaps an organisation, charitable organisation, a community organisation, and in much more rare circumstances, large improvement schemes. And again, we've got an example that we talked through in the report. The only one that we're currently aware of potentially being proposed is Enderby Relief Road, and we'll pick up on that. So as you move through the report, then we sort of take you through what we consider when those proposals come in through the various ways. So highway mitigation under the planning process. The real big factor here in our consideration is the need to be in accordance with national policy around planning and the National Planning Policy Framework. And really any measures that the developer is required to, because remember, when it comes in through this avenue, every party has to be in the end prepared to tie that down through some sort of legal agreement. Now, whether that be your planning permission, your 106, a 278 agreement, and it's not in all cases, but it's just worth bearing in mind here that that's the kind of thing that in a community meeting or when an idea comes out, perhaps presented by a developer, everybody's keen, but the realities of it as you move through the process, if they later then didn't want to be tied down through a legal agreement, perhaps causes problems in there. So from our perspective, if we're requesting something through that legally binding agreement, it absolutely has to be necessary to make the development acceptable. It's got to be directly related to that development, and it's got to be fairly and reasonably related in scale and kind. So it's got to be proportionate, basically. And it's compliance with this framework that limits our liability, things like cost of appeals. If we were to ask for things over and above those requirements when we were engaged in the planning process, that later became the subject of an appeal, that would obviously have cost to the authority. And as we've just discussed, that's not something that we're in a position to be able to take on, regularly. And we wouldn't want to. So through that planning process, the County Council's got to be satisfied that the measures proposed are appropriate for the site and that they don't have adverse impacts on the existing highway network, any existing infrastructure and the community around it. The sort of smaller improvement schemes that we've set out in paragraphs, and I think it's paragraph and subparagraph 23, are the types of things that you'll probably speak to your communities a lot about. So things like traffic calming, bus services, cycling and walking facilities. I know quite a number of you might have kind of what I would sort of loosely term missing links in footpath sort of routes and things like that your communities talk to you about and talk to us about. And the one that, again, I think probably if in an open way is probably the most common cause of frustration between the highway authority and communities would be sort of pedestrian crossings. And I won't go into too much detail on that here because you'll see in the report that we are reviewing our approach and criteria for pedestrian crossings just to double check that in the context of that challenge. But again, those schemes, sort of the same criteria apply. They have to be appropriate for the area that they're being proposed for. I'd have to represent value for money going forward. There may be additional costs involved in maintaining those assets, that type of thing. And obviously, although from a community perspective, it may seem a small thing, one bit of footpath, one crossing. If you multiply that up around Leicestershire and with the number of communities we have, there's considerable cost and resource associated with that as well. I'm largely focusing here, I think, because it's what people are interested in, why we might say no, but the same, if you apply the criteria the same way, that is also sometimes opportunities where we can work with third parties to bring in things that the community would want. And they are largely then in circumstances where there are things that as a highway authority we think would have some benefit, but they don't ever meet that top of the priority list for our funding, which, as we've just discussed, is prioritised and spread quite thinly. So there is that opportunity to do that. And then again, in paragraphs 24 to 28, we've just set out an example of a large improvement scheme. As I said, these are much rarer, and I think an example that some of you will be aware of is a proposed relief road in Enderby, and it's effectively a new link. And again, there's some questions of us about whether we would accept a new bit of infrastructure and why would we not. I think in this case that we're still assessing the impact and benefits of that proposal. It's a planning application in its own right, and so there are considerations around highway safety and functioning that we've talked about under the developer process, but also other practical considerations like the location of that proposal is quite near a previous landfill. There'd be environmental maintenance requirements that we'd need to satisfy ourselves that we could continue before we looked at it. So there's quite a bit of work. And the thing to say about that is it will be assessed on its merits. There's not a blanket no, we're not interested, and there's not a blanket yes, we'll take everything. It's these considerations that are set out in the report that drive our response to the proposals. And again, we've sort of focused on financial challenges. They summarised in paragraphs 29 to 32 of the report. And again, I think it's probably worth just mentioning that there's more. I think people think if they have the cost of the materials for a scheme, for instance, then that is the cost of the scheme. As you can appreciate, there's quite a lot of other costs that go into highway schemes, including staff time here, surveys, may require some liaison with other third parties like utility providers. And so when we talk about financial impact, it's not just the cost of putting that asset onto the highway. There may be other costs associated with that. And again, Chair, I won't go through the detail that's in the report, but happy to take any questions on it. So the report concludes that the County Council is willing to support offers of funding by third parties, organisations or individuals that cover the full cost, and that is a caveat there, full cost of highway and transport proposals, including physical works. It might be other schemes that we have in terms of promotions of active travel, for instance, bus operation, but they have to meet those requirements set out in the report. And I think handily, in terms of the principles of those requirements, are set out in the appendix, and there are 9 criteria there. Around sort of being in line with our overall aims and objectives, safety. I think where we, if you want to have sort of the phrase come a cropper with some of these things, so some of those 9 criteria that are more fundamental do tend to be that full cost recovery element, and also the ongoing maintenance costs. So how do we pay for 30 years of maintenance on an asset? In people who are approaching us for those schemes, that tends to be the surprise, how do we pay for that? And of course, the other factor, and Anne, Pat mentioned this, my team works closely with Pat's team on the engineering side, for instance. We are really struggling to resource our own business as usual with those technical experts. So even if all of those criteria are met, we still have to be able to resource working on design checks. And that is an area with a high competition for resource at the moment. So I think I'd leave it there, Chair, just to conclude that we're definitely open to the principle, but the practicalities and our responsibilities do mean that sometimes it's not possible for us to accept those offers.
Thank you for a very comprehensive report. Councillor Fillmore.
Thank you, Chair. I'm really pleased to see the comment about you reviewing it in 2024. I totally agree with you, Jan. As an elected resident representative, it can be incredibly frustrating because we do tend to get. The only comment I got here was actually on 23A. It says hierarchy of safety. That was the comment I got in my little paper, and I think observationally, one of the challenges that we have as elected representatives and you have as technical officers is DFT guidance, diddly-dee. There may not be any personal injury collisions, there may not be this and there may not be that, but actually when you've got residents saying the amount of near misses I see that's our role to represent that. But then we hit this buffer called the DFT guidance that says, well, actually, you're not triggering the criteria and therefore no. So I think having that review in 2024, I think for me, my ambition would be to see some, that hierarchy of safety measures. Is it more important outside of school or on a school run or route, especially when we're looking at things like the LC whip and we want the people to walk and cycle. Or is it more important to have it between a shop and an area where the elderly and infirm are living? And they're the frustrations I get because we keep not hitting the trigger point. So I look forward to seeing that review. And if you've got a hierarchy of safety we can work with, that would be even better. So thank you, Chair. Thank you, John.
Thank you. I would just like to comment on that because I work in the world of risk management and stuff, and I've had similar issues in my village when we've asked for an item and they say there's no fatalities, road traffic collisions. Them items tend to get reported. It's the near misses that don't get reported. And we have a saying in the world of health and safety, today's near miss is tomorrow's fatality. Okay, but it's going to be, I think it will be the most difficult thing in the world for the county council to record the near misses on roads and all the rest of it. It's just, you stand more chance of Platinum Fog or seeing a unicorn, but there you go. That's the world we live in. Thank you. Councillor Hack?
How do I follow that? No. The planting fog. It's yeah. I think these things are really actually in the the life of a county council. It's these nitty gritty stuff that actually create us lots of casework, lots of transactional pieces of work with our constituents. And sometimes when I get the responses back in terms of particularly on the traffic mitigations, I'm like, I haven't got a clue what you're talking about. Actually, if you could plain English those, that'd be really helpful, because there's lots of double negatives in there. I think the big, I suppose some of the, in terms of improvement schemes, I think the impact on the highway quite often, as as Councillor Phillimore was saying, you like, yeah, but it says it in the guidelines, but actually the reality is this. And I had something very similar in my division. It was a 5G mast that was going up on the Kingsway, which some of you will know. We just paid, I've been talking for since I've been a councillor to improve the pathway, and then we're going to put an ugly 5G mast right next to it. But the real worry I had is that was also going to be my new cycling route that we've been talking about for years and years. But it felt very much as if that was in a risky place for me, and I just couldn't prove it. It makes it really difficult. So actually creating some kind of over and above what the what would be good and what wouldn't be acceptable, I think will give us that little bit of extra support when we're looking at these things, the long-term impact of these things, because it can be problematic. So thanks for this, it's really helpful.
Councillor Allen.
Thank you very much, Chair. Again, just to sort of follow on from Councillor Phillimore's point, I think, like Amanda, there's a couple of locations, both in my division, and David, you'll know the other one which I'm thinking of, which is outside a school in Hinckley, where there has been quite a lot of pressure for a crossing. It's been reviewed. It's almost there, but not quite. So hearing that it's going to be reviewed for this coming year, it maybe offers a faint bit of hope to the residents campaigning for that, and hopefully there'll be a bit of flexibility built into the decisions moving forward. But welcome the review. Thank you, Jenna.
Looks like everybody's really looking forward to this report, Janice, so crack on and thank you. So we're asked to note the report, and we will take the report as noted and ask that comments made by members today be noted. Everybody in favour? Agreed. We'll now move on to item 10. Our final substantive item is a presentation on Storm Henk, a flooding update. The slides are at pages 41 to 50 of the agenda. Before I hand over to Pat Clark, I'd like to say that Councillor Phillimore will be first up asking a question on flooding. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Chair, and thank you for the committee for the opportunity to address you and give you a quick briefing on the update from the recent storm that went through Leicestershire. Okay, so Storm Henk started on the 2nd of January, Tuesday the 2nd of January. It did follow a period of high winds that resulted in a significant number of trees and branches that had fallen onto the network, onto the highway network, and created obstructions. It also had created obstructions in the watercourse and the waterways. Certainly some of the screens that had detritus and debris in them following those high winds. The storm came on the back of the wettest December that the county has seen for a number of years, and also Storm Babette that hit the county in October. In the highways operations teams, we started experiencing calls from around the 31st of December. The intensity really started coming up at that stage. And from this point, we did mobilise teams to work round the clock to deal with the inquiries, and equally to deal with the weather patterns that were coming in. Storm Henk fell on ground that was already saturated, and the rivers and watercourses were already reporting very, very high levels. Storm Henk tracked across the county, resulting in a prolonged day of rain intensive rain. Due to the conditions and the consequences, a Tactical Coordination Group, a TCG, and a Strategical Coordination Group, an SCG, was established across Leicestershire, Leicester and Rutland. The group was also supported by multi-agency groups to deal with the incident and respond to the events that were going. The SCG was first held on the evening of the 2nd of January and was chaired by the city. This was followed by further TCGs and SCGs that were followed by the County Council and ran right the way through until the end of the 5th of January, where the situation was then handed over to the RCG, the Recovery Coordination Group. Due to the nature and the severity of what was happening, a major incident was declared. That major incident ran between the 3rd and the 4th of January. This map shows the recording of the rain intensity that fell across Leicestershire between 1200 hours on the 1st of January through to 0000 hours on the 3rd of January. Whitwick recorded the highest level of rain, which was 40 millimetres. But that was preceded by 2 weeks prior to Storm Hank of around 114 millimetres of rain. As you can see from the map, the level of rain that fell across Leicestershire in Storm Hank was very consistent. Although the northwest, Melton and a band in the east, towards the east of the city, highlighted in purple, experienced the highest levels. However, the largest number of internal properties flooded did not follow this map. It actually focused around the watercourses that we had running through Leicestershire. Some further information. England is experiencing its 6th wettest year on record. It's about 20% higher than average. Some parts of the UK have recorded a third more rainfall than usual. Just an indication, the average rainfall for December in the Midlands is approximately 80 millimetres. Some areas received half of their monthly average in one day during Storm Hank. County-wide, flooding caused severe problems to the highway network and the impact to the highway network. It also resulted in a large number of properties and buildings and businesses were flooded. By the 9th of January, the highways team alone had received over nearly 500 calls, which resulted in 250 jobs being raised and 70 road closures being deployed out on the network. Around 400 residents and commercial properties were internally flooded. This number has increased since producing this report. And as of yesterday, in Leicestershire, 500 internal properties have been flooded. And if you include the city properties, it's gone up to 655 between the city and Rutland and ourselves. And in addition to that, over 100 properties have reported in Leicestershire have reported external flooding. Just a couple of quick examples of the challenges that we had to deal with over that period. The ambulance station in Loughborough actually got flooded in and needed support from the highways teams, the 4x4 emergency responders and the fire service. Many vulnerable residents were negatively impacted with flooding in their homes and were stranded. A lot of data was shared between all parties just so support could be given over that time. Parts of the River Soar reach record levels, and when measuring at Pillins and Kegworth, the gauges that there certainly were registering high levels of water. The EA have now reported that this was some of the highest water levels that they have seen in the county for a long time. In Loughborough and in Zoch, residents had to be evacuated by the Fire and Rescue Authority and find temporary accommodation in conjunction with the district councils. The worst area affected in Leicestershire was Charnwood, Loughborough, Horn, Soulby. The latest number of properties in those areas that were flooded is 269. This was then followed by Melton and Blaby. Melton 70 properties and Blaby 75, and this number is changing all the time. So an important part of what we did during the event was our communications, and we worked really hard with the communications team and equally the teams across all the district boroughs and services. So we sent messages out for people really to encourage them to sign up to the National Alert System, to signpost them to helpful websites where they could get information, to report flooding. It's really important that we understand those reports are coming in, but also to take care and look after themselves. Unfortunately, we did have to remind members of the public not to remove floodboards and not to ignore flood signs, because there was a number of reports that were coming in to us. And also, we really did have to amplify the message that the emergency services were putting out there. On the 4th of January, our Director of Transport, of Environment and Transport, Anne, was interviewed by BBC Leicester, and detailed the response that the county was undertaking at the time in combination with other responsible bodies. The County Council's communications team managed media inquiries, many of which were focused around the flooding that was in Loughborough, but that included a visit from Keir Starmer. It was really important that we ensured that messages were consistent, but also we showcased the wealth of what was going on in Leicestershire and what had been mobilised. So recovery is well underway. Responsible agents are working together to support and making sure that there is consistent messages out there and manage the recovery. Coordination visits via agencies have been communicated and are working well in the communities. Highway teams have been out there assisting with the clear up in operations. In highways, we have commissioned an additional gully cleansing unit to go out there and support with gully cleansing. Even when highway drains were operating as they should, the stormwater will have left detritus that needs to be cleared. Currently, we have over 8,000 gullies that have been identified that will need re-cleaning in as soon as we possibly can get out there to them. But that number is increasing all the time. We are working to understand the impact that the storm has on the highway asset, but this is likely to take us a number of months as we need to build up a full picture following the cleanse and then the investigation that will need to take place. But we're also aware of other damage to the highway that will be caused or that may be caused from water standing and freezing temperatures that we're currently seeing. The government have enacted the flood recovery framework for Storm Henk. Leicestershire has qualified. The team are working with the district authorities to collate data for submission to the Department of Levelling Up, Housing and Communities. Also, part of our recovery plan is, as I've already mentioned, the recovery coordination group that has been set up with a number of sub-cells, including a humanitarian assistance cell, an environment and infrastructure cell, a multi-agency information cell, and the media and communication cell. And a lessons learned on our initial response workshop has been arranged for the end of January. So our next steps. Where flooding meets the local thresholds as per the guidance, the lead local flood authority, the LLFA, has a duty to carry out a Section 19 investigation. This investigation is undertaken in partnership with other flood risk management authorities, such as the Environment Agency, Severn Trent Water, riparian owners, and the county's highways team, along with the city's highways team. It's not yet known how many formal investigations will be required. We are still receiving reports on flooded properties, and once we have all the data, we will be able to build up the picture of where the investigations will take place and the size and what will be required once we're able to finalise the numbers. Formal investigations for Storm Henk will be very resource intensive on an already stretched resource that was working on investigations from Storm Babette from June and October 23's events. These investigations involve many different agencies and can be very complex and time consuming. Just for information, the LLFA does not have the powers to make agencies implement the solutions when they are responsible. I think it's important to note, in some instances, there may not be a realistic or affordable solution to prevent flooding to properties. With the challenges we see in climate change, meaning more rainfall, greater intensity when it rains, it is really important that we make sure that communities move forward to self-resilience and protection with community action. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for your support. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Pat. Firstly, I'd like to thank you for a very comprehensive report. Secondly, I'd like to convey my thanks on behalf of everybody on the committee to all of the members of staff who have worked tirelessly in very arduous conditions. Okay, so please pass that on to everybody involved. And I'd like to thank Councillor Hack for raising this as an agenda item. And at very short notice, you've pulled the report together. I'm sure the committee would look forward to seeing any information you could share from the Lessons Learnt workshop in January. And I would like to ask all members who are going to ask questions is try not to ask questions or ask for data or answers that Pat and the team haven't got yet. Okay, because there's still a lot of work ongoing and all the rest of it. So as promised, I'll open the floor to Councillor Philly Moore and then.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you. This might actually take longer than your presentation. Echo the Chair's comments. Hats off to the teams, both here and in the district and borough authorities. It was a hard day, no question about that. So I think for me, 2 or 3 points spring to mind. I'd like to say I lived the dream, but it wasn't a dream. And I would be delighted to offer any input into the lessons learned, because I spent 7 hours in a flood in Cosby, stopping it flooding properties, amongst many other things. And we do know that this one is unusual. So I've got properties that I would absolutely in my patch that I absolutely expected to be flooded, and they weren't. And I've got places that have never been flooded. And I think, in Amanda's patch, the street there, I was born and bred around there. My living memory, and that estate's been around for about 70 years, I think. I don't ever remember that flooding. So it is different this year, which then leads on to the urgency, and for me as an elected representative, to press for the Section 19, particularly for Whetstone. You've mentioned Blaby. Two of those are my patches, so Counterthorpe and Whetstone are my patch. On the Sunday after the storm, there was a residents' meeting organised by the residents' meeting, the affected properties, and I thank Maggie, with a different hat on as deputy leader, came and supported me along with one of the officers from Blaby. And we had to stand in front of 58 residents who quite understandably wanted to get some noise and frustration and some trauma and everything else off their chest. And, that's why we exist, so people can, they weren't rude particularly, they just wanted to sound off at somebody, and we were there. I know what is happening, because there's a WhatsApp chat group that I'm party to, and because we're not providing the answers, they're creating the answers themselves, and that is a very, very dangerous place to be. So I think one of the things that we could have done that is different, because yes, there's lots of comms gone out there, but if people haven't got a TV and their fridge is not working and their cooker's not working and their house is being destroyed, are they listening? Or are they actually trying to sort their house and their life out? So I think what we probably could have done, and I certainly personally took out the printed government guidance on what to do after a flood and handed it to every single resident and said, that's what you need to know. Okay, so I think we can actually up future response. And as members, actually, I'm certainly very happy, and I'm guessing Maggie would be, to actually pick up that hard copy information and walk our affected residents, say, this is what you need to know in the short term. This is the process moving forward, and I've got here the pathway. That's what my residents want to know. What happens now? Okay, they've got their own challenges with insurance and getting their lives back together, but actually they want to know what happens now, what happens next week, what happens next month, and we know that the Section 19, if and when it's triggered, is not an overnight thing. It's going to take a long time, but residents need to know that. Because I've got residents who think the second that Section 19 is triggered, it's all going to happen. No, it's not. My pressure to you guys as the officers is, I think it's over 20 properties in Whetstone are flooded. I would like to see that Section 19 triggered. I know you're working your way through the system. You've got lots of demands on your time and resource. But I think there is an absolute need to keep our residents informed in a different way. They're not listening. One of my officers at Blaby has been one of the main coordinators down for the Blaby district. They are absolutely confident that certain residents have had the information via an email or verbally. The question that I've got is, are they actually listening? Their world has just been turned upside down. They're in trauma. They're not listening. Or if they are, they're only hearing what they want to hear, and we've got to do much better, I think, on that. I'd love to be involved in the lessons learned. The big challenge I have at the moment is, if we do not provide the answers that they need to know, which is what happens now, what happens next, they will create their own answers, and that is something we absolutely must not allow to happen, because they will be then looking for something that is likely not to appear, and that will just create more frustration, more criticism, more of not the good stuff. So I think we can communicate better, and I think we just need to be very conscious when our residents are in a state of trauma. They're not going to be listening to what we're telling them on the doorstep. We need to be able to give them something physically, say, this is what you need to know now. This is the likely process moving forward. So I think that's it from me, Chad. I think we need to tighten up on the comms bit and just get some more information out to our residents a bit quicker. And it's qualified information, of course, and that's the key. So thank you, Chair. Thank you, officers.
Very passionate response. Any officers like to comment? Very wise move.
I'll go and then Jan will come in with all the right answer in the detail, okay? Really, really valuable to get your input to that, absolutely, and your feedback. And I do think it's something, we need to think about for this lessons learned thing as well, to get those member input who are out there experiencing it. I think that would be really valuable as well. Absolutely understand the point about pressing for the section 19s, but I know you fully understand we're still at the process of gathering it all. Then when we do, there's going to be a very long list. Then there's going to be a priority thing. And then we're looking at, as I mentioned, kind of in the MTFS report, how we actually resource that. Are we with, if we've got our existing resource, it will be a very long time. Can we expand that? How can we manage to do that to support, getting through those quicker? A massive challenge to get over to residents that this will not be a quick job. It's not, we can look at it 1 week and next week we've got an answer. Some of them, past experience, are years in the making because they're so complex, so many different parties. It's not an easy thing to understand why suddenly there's such an influx of water in a certain area. And as you say, this time we've seen areas flooded we've never known flooded before. What's going on, what's happening, etc. Apart from the fact we already had really high river levels, saturated land from masses of, how do we deal with that? What do we do? So there's something around asking for patience and getting people managing expectations. Communications has got to be the key of that. We have set up a weekly internal comms group to look at what we need to be putting out. Then get your point about actually how do we do it in the best way when people are either, moved out of their property because they can't, it's not habitable, etc., or trying to manage in that awful, dreadful situation they are, as best they can. We need to think about how we do that. Really, really pleased to hear, because we did send out a communication to members with link here, link there, link that, and I know it was loads, but for the people in the thick of it, at least there was somewhere you could go and have a look and did this help, point people to. But again, then that's a really valuable bit. Sometimes that's no good giving them a link to, actually it needs to be, here you are, go and phone this number on a piece of paper. So there's another thought about actually when you're in that real height of the moment, what does help? And it's not maybe an email, as you say, because they've got no electronic communication, that kind of thing. So that's really, really useful. I think the other thing I would say about it is the peak and the pressure or the demand to know, what do I do now? How do I hold the water back? What do I do to fix my house? How do I go forward? What are you doing to stop it ever happening again? We have to deal with all that, but we have to get much better at getting on the front foot and not thinking about it until we're 2 foot underwater. And I think that's a big job for all of us. But we really appreciate member support and helping to have those conversations and pass on the information to their communities. Sorry, Jana's probably got a more detailed view.
No, not at all, really. I was just going to, sorry, Chair, is it okay? Yeah, sorry. I would just to sort of emphasise that I think with the relaunch of the strategy that, we brought to you and has been project cabinet in December, I think there's a really good opportunity to do some of that comms around it could be you. Don't think just because you've never been flooded before that it won't happen now. So we will do section 19s for properties that meet the criteria for internal flooding, but there's probably a number of residents who came closer to that being them than ever have. Maybe didn't quite happen, but I think while it's not an incident, while we've got that be prepared message, what kind of things can you do in your own home? And I know asking people to support themselves in a time of financial difficulty is never a pleasant message, but I think we really do need to push that. So I think the feedback about what we do when an incident happens and the way we communicate is really, really useful. But for me, if we could have people have already had a message that meant they're more prepared for those incidents, because I think the reality is we need to be, that will be a measure of success of us as working together on the back of that refresh strategy, because a lot of good information about that has gone in there. And like I say, the 19s and section 19s are really complicated, but I think there is a really good opportunity for us to work together over the next couple of months to launch that and to have that message go out.
Thank you. Councillor Fryer.
Thank you very much. And I reiterate that all the help everybody has given, both communities, councils, County and Borough. I should just make it clear for people who don't know, the divisions I cover are Quorn and Barrow. and I also sit on Charnwood Borough Council. I'm Borough Council of that. So when you go through this and you see that, well, we don't know the latest figures, but approximately 100 homes were flooded just in Charnwood area. I think last figures I had, which probably a few days out of date, there's likely to between 30 and 40 of them cannot go back in their homes for probably more than 6 months minimum. And that's a lot of them out of 100. And businesses I've been informed about, one who may have to close completely, never to reopen because of the flooding. Now, on two things I want to bring up is I have the canal and the river Saul and the canals and Pillings Lock running through my division. And I have to say, I've been in this area and lived in that village for 30 years. And when it was British Waterways, they were regularly dredged. And I have to say, hand on heart, since it's become the Canals and Rivers Trust, and this isn't only me speaking, we have never seen a dredger down either the canal or the river in that area, in those two villages. We used to see even once a year would be helpful, because people are throwing things in the canals and rivers. We know that. And when you've got nearly 20,000 students, and Loughborough is one of the biggest towns now in the county, and for population, and you've got people just throwing things in the canals. Now, on a positive note, last year through this council, I arranged that we got flood warning signs, which are a bit like the school signs, warning of school sign, and we have 3 installed in Barrow to stop people going down Slash Lane or to tell them not to. And these are on the main entrance to the village and on another 2 roads. And it flashes a light, it says it's flooded, and it also gives the depth of water. So that has saved a lot of problems. I have been in touch with Anne's department because it was suggested to me by someone living in a village that gets flooded, Salby, but doesn't have the warning signs. Could this be put on an app, a telephone app, so people don't even start their journey and then find they can't complete it, they can divert it. And I know that the officers are looking into it. They're going to get in touch with the manufacturers of this piece of equipment and to see if it can be done. But I think this is something that in the future, where there is a risk of flooding from places like Slash Lane and others that will come to it, this saves so much problem. And in the long run, I know it needs to be set up, I know, but in the long run, it saves money, time, effort. It saves people ringing up. Like, I've got my car stuck or I can't get out or something. So that is my positive note, that it has been hugely successful. And the number of my residents, not my resident, but the residents in my division who've come up to me, and that has been a godsend, Hilary, that we know we cannot get out of the village that way. And until before then, they would drive down there, remove barriers or something, oh, I'll get through that water, and then get stuck. We did have some tragedies, as you know. We had some animals lost their life, horses, and we also had a boat that broke its moorings, a big houseboat barge, and that got stuck with the river bridge. And for about 2 or 3 days, we couldn't get out of the village except by doing a big diversion. But thank you very much to all the efforts.
Thank you. Another passionate statement, comments, questions. Any response required? I don't think there was any questions there per se. So I will now go to Councillor Lovegrove. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Short and sweet. No need to repeat everything that's already been said. I'll endorse your thanks to everybody that was involved from the authority for the extraordinary lengths that everybody went to for something that caught us by a surprise in a way. We learn a lot from things when things go well. We learn twice as much when things don't go well. And people will always look for somebody to blame. And so we have to take that on the chin and work through it. It will happen again. And Pat was right in saying it's about self-reliance. One of the things I wanted to mention is the storm started with heavy winds, and you might not be able to answer this. It might be something we need to prepare for in the future. In the Beaver Division, it's very rural. I'm on a rural crime watch at WhatsApp. The police got in touch with all the local farmers to please come and help chainsaw trees, and they came out in their droves. About how technically legal that is, or insurance wise, or is it just when needs must? People do rely on farmers, tow tractors out of flooded water, but using chainsaws, there was a bit of tongue-in-cheek stuff going around on the WhatsApp, but it is important, I think, that in the future we have some guidance that we can give to people when they go out, because they are on highways. If you use a chainsaw off your property, you're supposed to have a training and a certificate to use it off your property. But everybody was just going out with the chainsaws and clearing the roads. But it's about a technical, legal thing about not putting ourselves in a difficult position in the future. So it's about that, the wind and the trees and the farmers coming to people's aid of getting trees out of the way was the question I wanted to ask. If you're able to answer it. Thank you, Chair.
Did you want to ask a question? I thought you were just smiling at me. Pat, can you come back about chainsaws before everybody rushes out to B&Q and buy one?
I can't advise people in doing that, unfortunately. What I will do is I will look at that as part of the lessons learned. It's not a straightforward answer. And if you are the person doing the asking, you then end up being the person responsible. So we do have to be careful. However, we have to open up, we have to open up access for people. We have to make it easier for people to move around. So I will take that on and I'll come back to you on it.
Thank you. Councillor Hatt.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for getting this put on the agenda, getting this paper together so quickly. I think it's, so far the discussion has been really valuable, and certainly as everyone has said already, the colleagues at all the authority levels have just worked exemplary, and now we've got freezing cold weather, so there's been no let up for them. So if you echo the thanks. I think what would be really helpful, and I'm sure, what I don't want to do is go, are you doing this, are you doing, but it's these kind of things that come into your mind just as a normal person, which we are here to represent our community. So it'd be really useful for us as councillors, because I don't think we've been as involved in the Section 19 processes as right. So it'd be really useful for us to know what the triggers are, what we should expect as councillors, because we are quite often the first port of call. So that would be really helpful for us, because I don't know the technical detail of it. I wouldn't want to guess. We've obviously, on the Scrutiny Commission agenda, we've got Leicestershire Matters. To me, it seems like we could have a pull-out middle section that very much would be, this is what to do in, we know that there's been heavy floods. We probably need as an authority to respond to that. And we've got, what's the point of having a circular that goes out as regularly as it does without using it for this kind of emergency messaging? So make sure that you register. A paper copy means it's more accessible, particularly for those that don't use the internet, and certainly for the residents that are affected on the street in Braunston. I door knocked all the street, and half of them weren't there because they're in bungalows and they're elderly. They've already been moved out by their families or whatever you. So being able to get a copy to every Leicestershire resident might pick up those that don't necessarily, not the resident themselves, themselves, but their family, their loved one that can give them that message. I think, what to do in a flood. The kind of stuff that we have at my office is I've got a fire pack. If there's a fire, I have a documents bundle that I need to take out, and it's part of my responsibility for looking after my building at work. It feels to me that we could give residents advice of what we would recommend you put in a sealed envelope or whatever that you can get to in quick access if something like that happens to you. I think the key factor though is the aftermath, and I was door knocking in Packington at the weekend, and Packington quite often gets flooded, and I chatted to a chap in his 80s struggling with the aftermath. He really wasn't physically able, and I think there is that real sense of what extra we need to do with those that are the most vulnerable in our communities, because if my house flooded, it would be a bit of a disaster, but I'm pretty physically fit. Two working age adults can pretty much deal with all of the complexities of it. But if you're in your 80s, everything's online, there's no telephone numbers. These kind of things have become so much more difficult for people to access. So what can we do to help those individuals? Because getting your insurance sorted, it's a nigh impossibility. Imagine being 85 or whatever, you can't do these things easily online. It's not easy. And I think we just need to be mindful of our most vulnerable residents, and I know that you will be. I'm not telling you that you're not going to be doing that, but it's what extra could we do, and support we could give as councillors to our communities that you can push to us. And I think that's the other thing, is that we are a network of people that are within our communities, whether it's as county level, district, or at town and parish level. There are more than just the county councillors. We've got our colleagues that can help us with that. So use us. We're a valuable resource in our communities. Don't forget us. And the email was really helpful. My printer don't work, so I can't physically print nothing, but it was really useful to be able to get that to my residents quickly. And I've got a few on a WhatsApp, and I just sent them a WhatsApp message. So that makes it really helpful. But thank you again for all the support. And I know, an old nag bag when it comes to individual bits of casework, but overall I think it was a really great response. One little diddly question though is I've got a border with the city, and there is this real distinction between two separate flood authorities, and I know I'm not the only border that would have been affected in this, particularly in sort of the northern edge as well. Is understanding how the city and the county work together, I think, is going to be really important for those crossover divisions. So anything you can give back to us, I'd be really grateful. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
And just come back in a couple of those. Thanks very much. That was really helpful. Firstly, Section 19 triggers. Yeah, that is something that is agreed locally, and it is in our flood risk management strategy, but we can certainly circulate that for you and let you know about it. I mean, you've some really valuable stuff, and I did mention earlier, we've set up now, and I think it's a weekly flood comms meeting, and I will feed all those points into them. I mean, that point about a paper physical pull out with all that key information in Leicestershire Matters, I think is a really, really good one. So I'll feed those things into that. And in terms of working with the city, we're really good at working with them across borders, and I particularly know the one you're talking about, and I know there was a meeting earlier this week, not only obviously with the city, but with the other flood risk management authorities that are involved in that one. But yes, we're two different organisations, but we are good at linking up on that. Doesn't matter whether it was lead local flood authority or if it was the highway side element of it, highway drains, Leicestershire, highway drains, Leicester City, etc. But it's another challenge, but I think we're quite good at that on that front.
Thank you. Ozzy, you raised your hand.
No, I'd just like to echo the committee's, thanks to the officers, because I personally know, working with them, how hard they worked. I have actually put a request in that our flood team get more resources, because they've worked hard and fast. God knows how many overtime hours they've put in, because they're a small team with a big job to do. And as you've known now, we've had 2 or 3 floods in storms in the last few months. They're under a lot of pressure, and I really do want heartfelt thanks to them all for the work that they've done. and they continue to do. And not only that, and you said the weather's bad. I also want to thank the gritters because they're out every night. They do a damn good job. I was out with them last week, and they do a really good job. And sitting in that cab for 5.5 hours, knowing what they do, brought a new experience to me. So I think, all in all, we've got a damn good team of officers here that really work so hard and committed for our communities that through the flooding and through the bad weather. I just want to put on record my thanks as cabinet member.
Thank you. Jenna,
Just really quick, Chair, if that's okay. Just to confirm, I'll be slightly miserable on the resources front. So I think it's really important, and I thank Ozzy and everybody for their support. We will look to resource those Section 19 investigations and our options for that. I suppose I just wanted to add a kind of expectation management that obviously there are a lot of authorities looking for additional support to do that, and our ability to sort of accelerate that programme might be limited by not just funding but by actual resources out there. But we'll do as hard as we can to do that. I think the other thing that I just want to say was that I know our teams will really appreciate that thanks they've had, and I know my teams and Pat's team working closely together. But I think they would also just want to pass on, and we would as well, that our thoughts for those people you've mentioned, that are still struggling with the impacts of it, and that sort of preventing that happening to people in our communities. We've all got friends and family as well, is very much on the team's mind. So just from us, we know we've all got our roles and responsibilities, but we're definitely thinking of those people that have been affected by the floods and sort of hoping that they recover quickly from it. And I think our teams would just want to pass that back as well, because they do appreciate the thanks they've had from yourselves as well.
I would just like to close. There's obviously no more questions, but a very interesting debate. Oh, sorry. Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to say, as part of my support role to Ozzy, I do sit on the Trent River Flood and Coastal Committee, and with the EA, the Environment Agency, and I was at a meeting yesterday, and one of our officers did a presentation on how Leicestershire was affected, and I put forward from a member's perspective, because I had quite a lot of experience of it on January the 2nd. I think what I would like to say is that we had a presentation yesterday and it lasted for about 1.5 hours, and it showed the true devastation, not just only in Leicestershire, but on the Trent, East Midlands, West Midlands, to give you some sort of perspective of what the EA are dealing with. Janet has just touched on that there are only so many resources and capacity out there, and people and engineers with the expertise needed to complete Section 19 investigations, but also business cases going forward. I think it's really important to stress to our residents, and manage expectations. One of my communities was flooded in 2019. We had 35 houses that were internally breached. We are still waiting. We've had a Section 19 completed. The local authorities, ourselves and the districts have done a lot of work to try and improve the work around there, but we are now waiting for the business case going forward to the Environment Agency. This was from 2019. I stood with that community when their houses had been breached 2 years ago, and they'd been out of their houses for 18 months, 2 years, and we were on the brink of facing the same thing again. So what I'm saying is that there is to get, and I was asking the Environment Agency yesterday, that we've got to cut through the red tape and the bureaucracy of getting business cases dealt with quicker to get grant and aid to us, because that's a level above us, to get the mitigations in place. And some of these mitigations, you're talking upwards of 250 to 500,000. It's an awful lot of money going forward. So I'd just like to say that, and I think part of the lessons learnt is to what we can do, and also is that we need to say to communities about self-sufficiency. Pat touched on in his presentation about this is the 6th wettest year on record for England, but it's also for us as a county as well. And I think I'm putting an email, you know, quite rightly and realistically, this is going to be a pattern going forward. So we've got to be ready for it. One of my communities was totally cut off because there was water courses in. And I think my message to my community is self-help, because the cavalry is not going to come galloping over the hill. So I think that's one thing in the resilience programs that we're putting forward, that has got to be something in. So I'm sorry to be quite realistic, but that is the reality of the situation we're facing. Thank you for your time, Mr. Chair.
Anne.
Sorry, just on a similar theme, and just very briefly, but on that element of self-help, it just reminds me of in 2016 or 17, without talking to a community that had been flooded in 2016, and a householder who was returning into his house after 12 months of being out of his house. When I asked him if he'd put any property level protection, he hadn't. Simple things like putting your plugs up your wall, etc. Sorry, I just wanted to raise it because a lot of you will be talking to your communities and residents that are directly affected. They're having to go through that awful time of, you know, getting their houses redone, etc., to get back into them. But they have an opportunity with that to put it in so that if it does happen again, because we cannot guarantee it won't, that they're in a better position. So I just wanted to share that one with you. Thank you.
Councillor Fillmore, is this a short one or are you?
No, it'll be fairly short and sweet, Chair, and I will end on a humorous bit because it is worth ending on. So I think just picking on Councillor Wright's point, and the point I got here is point one: is the science up to date? That we're looking at the flood mitigation that the planning officers are looking at, and so that's one question. Going back to the comms bit, day one. Point one, for the officers knocking on doors, making sure people were safe, was actually very few people understood that the water was likely contaminated, and actually is a massive public health issue. So I then had a sweep round a week after, and I've still got people with carpets down. They're still using the fridges that have had flood water in. So I think it comes back to that. What do you need to know today? Issue. I think on record, it is worth putting on record. There's a company called Polygon who seem to be a collective insurers agency who, from what I've picked up, have been absolutely brilliant, off the scale brilliant. They've literally walked in, out, get that out. Yes, got it, right, clear it, gone. They've got the trades in, they've got the skips in, house cleared. Unbelievable service. Gullies. You mentioned it, you instigated additional gully killing. The only question I've got really, Pat, and take it away from here is, how was the priority set? Because I've had reports Enderby has been being cleaned either today or yesterday, and yet it was Whetstone that was flooded. And it just seems a bit odd that we're going somewhere that wasn't flooded rather than somewhere that was flooded. So it's a takeaway, that one, Pat. I'm hoping the MPs are pressing ministerial bodies to get some extra funding in place to support officers and the resource needed. I'm hoping that so by the end of the day, I've got some short words from been talking to Victoria and Will about I need some words to take to my residents. And the amusing story, and it comes back to the tree cutting and can we come up. So Cosby was, I drove through, there was that much space on the brook, no obvious issue. I got a phone call within an hour saying, Les, can you help so-and-so? So I've just driven through. And within an hour, it went from being that much left on the brook to some parts being under a metre deep. It was just odd, the speed it went through. So as I'm seeing this water rise and rise, so for those who don't know, I'm the clerk at Cosby Parish. I phoned the county council, we've got the emergency members line. They, you know, we need some help. Can we get some sandbags? Can we get the roads closed? Can we get? Right. And then, you know, this water is literally doing this. Hang on a minute. We've got a load of traffic cones in available as the parish council. I phoned the control room, the emergency number back, and he says, I think that's a really good idea, but I'm just going to check with the control room to make sure that it's okay. And the answer came back, and this is the humorous bit, but it's about us all being in it, trying to get it sorted because it's a highway property. And their comment was, yes, that would be very helpful. Because that just means that the other lads can just go off and look after somebody else. And all I needed them to do was follow on and put the flood signs up on the end of the road so that it was closed. But actually stopping people driving through and causing a wake, that was the priority. So the humorous bit is the control room said, the computer says yes. And be very helpful. So that's it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So, very, very interesting discussion, and I do feel for the people who've been flooded. And I'd like to close with a couple of comments. We've spoke about lessons learned and all kinds of communications, apps, Tinternet, hard copy, and the Leicestershire Matters and all the rest of it. But having served in the military in the Caribbean in '86 and been involved in hurricane preparation, we did go around and knock coconuts off trees. And it became very clear to me why we had to do that. Because when they're traveling at 120 miles an hour, you don't want to be hit by one. But I was also involved in hurricane recovery, and it's very difficult situation. I think Councillor Fillmore mentioned when people have been flooded and are in an awful situation, the last thing on their mind is to read an aid memoir they've got stuck on the fridge, okay, because they've got pets to think about and relatives and all the rest of it. So when we think about how we can improve people's involvement in floods, I'd like to quote something I was quoted many, many years ago by a very seasoned veteran in the military when it comes to training people. And he said, I am told and I forget. So we can tell them what to do, but in a short period of time, they'll forget it. They'll have watched 6 episodes of Strictly Come Dancing and it's all gone out the window. I see and I remember. So we can give them aid memoirs and printouts and all the rest of it. And they might remember 10% of that when it comes to the crunch. But I do and I understand. And I don't understand why this country doesn't do flood resilience training for areas that are going to flood all the time and have what we call no duff exercises where all the comms are tested and everything's sent out to the residents with clear indication that it's no duff and it's not a proper flood, but you need to start looking at your aid memoirs and all the rest of it. And I think I'll end with 3 things we need to do in the communities. And it's training, training, training. Okay, people don't know what to do in times of a flood or emergency. And if they flooded once, they may flood again in the next 2 or 3 years. And that's it. Thank you. So we're asked to note the views of the committee and the comments made for consideration. Is everybody happy with that? Item 11, date of the next meeting. The next meeting is scheduled for 7th of March 2024 at 1400 hours. I work off Army clock time. Item 12, any other items which the chairman has decided to take as urgent? There are no urgent items. I'd like to thank you for attending today's meeting and I now declare the meeting closed. And we're off stream.